You're listening to Monocle on Saturday, first broadcast on the 22nd of February 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello there, it's Emma Nelson here, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday, and on today's programme we'll be looking through the week's news and culture with Simon Brooke. Simon, good morning. What have you spotted?
Well, the FT has an interesting analysis of just where we are with regard to President Trump's initiative to bring peace to Ukraine and his relationship. The bromance continues with President Putin.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Then we'll be hearing from Georgina Godwin on her travels.
Our literary event was a private salon hosted in the home of Smita Bajaj of the Jacaranda Literary Agency and attended by her stellar list of local authors.
More from Georgina in a moment. That's all coming up on Monocle on Saturday with me, Emma Nelson. First, though, a look at the headlines. Hamas is due to release 6 more Israeli hostages today in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli prisons. It follows confirmation that the body of the Israeli hostage Shiri Bibas has now been returned via the Red Cross. Hamas handed over the bodies of her 2 young sons, Kfir and Ariel, on Thursday, but remains which it said were of Shiri Bibas turned out to be an unidentified woman. Donald Trump says Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky and Russia's Vladimir Putin have got to get together to end the war. Answering questions from reporters in the Oval Office, the US president also said the mineral deal with Ukraine is pretty close to being signed. Zelensky appeared to support this, saying the 2 countries were working on a draft agreement. And Pope Francis is not yet out of danger, but is expected to live, according to one of his doctors. Francis is being treated at Rome's Gemelli Hospital, where he was admitted last week after struggling with breathing difficulties. He's being treated in hospital for double pneumonia. And those are the headlines on Monocle Radio. In full health is Simon Brooke. Good morning, Simon.
Poor Pope.
Poor Pope. Actually, I've been quite glued to Vatican.va.
No idea it existed.
It's absolutely amazing. Bright red. An amazing website that gives you, I think it's Vatican Radio's website. And obviously Vatican Radio is something that we've all been tuned to quite closely in the last few days. Yeah, Vatican News. And it's lovely. And I tell you why. Because it gives you the updates that you just get when you go and visit a relative in hospital. Because this morning, top line is Pope Francis had a restful night. Yesterday,
hold the front page.
Literally hold the front page. And yesterday it was Pope Francis has breakfast sitting in a chair, and I just find it utterly charming and lovely to find that sort of the Vatican Radio is actually doing its job so neatly and elegantly, just basically being told. So it's going asking the nurses, how is he, and then just plonking it straight on the website.
Why not?
Always an interesting read to dive into a place that the workings of which you only ever see in the likes of Conclave.
Completely, which I highly recommend if it's still on at a cinema near you.
It is superb, really, really good. Anyway, how's your week been? Apart from, I've just been following Pope Francis, possibly as a sort of a break from the Trump saga. But what have you been up to?
Well, that is it, really, isn't it? I think I will be following Pope Francis's the latest
please
development.
don't.
It just sounds so reassuring and so calming, just the kind of thing you need, because I'm normally, being a journalist, a news junkie. I mean, I literally, if I haven't checked on the headlines every half an hour or something, I'm getting withdrawal symptoms. But I read recently that up to 40% of people are actually what we call news avoiders. They deliberately avoid reading the news or finding out what's going on in the world. And I have to say, this week, especially with the situation in Ukraine and the Trump administration, I have felt slightly like that, because it just seems that every headline we are getting is so unfair, is so shocking, is so suggesting that we will be led into more conflict, global instability or whatever, that, I'm looking for something else like the news of Pope Francis to take my mind off things.
Poorly popes are keeping us going. What I think was amazing this week was when the mainstream media suddenly called out Trump and said, hang on a minute, you're saying Zelensky is a dictator. You're saying he started the Ukraine war. I think someone said there are true facts and there are incorrect facts, which I'd never believe. That was an idea I had to get my head around. I thought a fact is a fact, but gosh, wasn't I wrong? And actually people turning around and saying, this is wrong. And I'm interested to know what's going to happen to those Trump supporters, Republicans, a big chunk of the American population who voted for Donald Trump because they believed that their lives would be made better and that, had good intentions with all this. But seeing what he is doing on the geopolitical stage, I'm wondering how much that's actually going to start to impact how they feel about it. Because ultimately, if your life is better and if you've got more money in your back pocket, then actually Trump is not a bad thing.
And that's what won him the election last time, as we know, that famous question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Tens of millions of voters, especially across the Midwest, the flyover states, as they're sometimes known, said, yeah, we're worse off. We perhaps if we do bother reading the news, we discover that, figures showing that generally the economy is booming and that the Biden administration is doing the right thing in terms of building a green economy. But the price of eggs, for instance, was an issue, wasn't it? And that question about, struggling to put food on the table. So that is going to be the main issue. I do think it's quite interesting. The FT has a piece today looking at the development of Trump's relationship with Putin and his take this week, which, I can't believe it's only a week because things move at such dizzying speed in the Trumposphere, don't they? But interesting, some polling I saw that showed just 8% of people in the US believe that Putin is a good person and trustworthy. So, to answer your question, I suppose, will those people then be so shocked by Trump's embrace of Putin that they're really disillusioned by him? I don't know. But this FT piece is looking at where we are with regard to the Trump take on Ukraine. And it's got quotes from various sort of international observers and analysts. Obviously, the Democrats are not happy. Jason Crow, Democratic member of the House of Representatives from Colorado, is quoted saying, to start negotiations by meeting with the adversary as opposed to our partner Ukraine sent exactly the wrong message and got this off on the wrong foot. There's also, interesting, there are obviously still plenty of Russia hawks in the Republican Party. So again, is Trump out of step, not just with voters, but also with his own politicians on the Hill? To the extent that the White House said that Ukraine started the war, I disagree, says John Kennedy, a Republican senator from Louisiana. I think Vladimir Putin started the war, and he describes Putin as a gangster, which I think a lot of people would agree with. So, yeah, interesting to see whether Trump can get a deal which will satisfy his own side.
Well, I think anything that happens, he will always say that he wins. I think that's
completely.
That is the way.
But the problem is, if he wins, it's sort of short term. That this is the real question, isn't it? Whether he will manage to end it briefly, but then the problem is if he hands Putin victory on a plate, in effect, then we're just waiting for the next few years when Putin is ready to take the rest of Ukraine. And then, as people have pointed out, the Baltic states, Moldova, other parts of Europe or whatever. So, but then again, I think that's very much a Trump thing, the sort of the short term, the quick deal, and then we'll worry about what happens afterwards.
I think there's a good line from John Bolton, Trump's national security advisor during his first term and a former US ambassador to the UN, saying the personal criticism of Zelensky has been particularly jarring. Bolton's quote is, he thinks he and Putin are friends and he doesn't like Zelensky. As a result, Trump is repeating things that the Russians would like the rest of the world to believe that simply aren't true. Every time you turn around, Trump is giving Putin a bigger advantage. This is what's so dangerous, isn't it? Because that whole thing of turn your back and he says something new, how we get used to this is something that I'm not entirely sure we've got an answer to yet. But if he says something which is inflammatory, in quite a lot of situations it can be dialed down. Or if he makes an announcement about some sort of reform or what have you, there are legal processes which are now absolutely in play in the United States which can put the brakes on Trump's statement. But if you have him saying things about Volodymyr Zelensky being a dictator, people can talk, and the White House has rolled back really hard on that in the last couple of days. It doesn't matter. It's out there. It's done. It's memorable. And most importantly, it's being listened to in Moscow.
Absolutely. And I think that's typical of the way, as we've said, the way Trump works. It's all a sort of, it's all an quick interaction. There's no strategy necessarily. And it's all about personal relationships. So it's really interesting if you look at Trump's language, how much he describes somebody as being a nasty man or a really great guy, whatever. It's all about the person rather than the office or the idea or certainly the strategy. The Times has got an interesting piece looking forward to Sir Keir Starmer, the UK British Prime Minister's visit to Washington, saying that Starmer and his aides are war. I mean, this is such a political, diplomatic tightrope, isn't it? So, according to the Times, the Prime Minister and his aides are wargaming both the public and private elements of the trip, which will take place next week against this most inauspicious of backdrops. And interesting as well, just reminding us how Starmer has had to sort of try and walk this tightrope between supporting Zelensky, who obviously deserves our support on the one hand, but then also keeping President Trump on side in some way so that they will at least be able to have a civil discussion next week when they meet.
It's a civil discussion, but I think we perhaps need to be honest that the way that Trump operates is that, dare I say it, thoughtful British lawyers, which is what effectively Keir Starmer is, and maybe not Trump's sort of kind of guy. He quite likes the strong man. That is absolutely it.
He doesn't like lawyers unless they're working for him, really, does he?
So, he doesn't like lawyers. He doesn't like quiet, thoughtful, reasonable people.
That's going to be very difficult.
This is going to be hard. And that amount of weight that is being placed on Starmer's shoulders. I mean, someone needs to say, look, should we just look at the circumstances for this thing? There's a really good article, and the FT's doing fabulously this weekend. And it has this idea about there are no shortcuts to manage the Russia challenge. I mean, we're looking, and maybe there are shortcuts to manage Trump, that you just do a deal and that's that. But the idea that Trump can bring about an end to the conflict in Ukraine and sort it in 100 days, it might happen. However, this article by Alexander Gabuev, who's the director of the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center in Berlin, says that the one thing that you don't forget is that Putin will always see the West as the enemy. So it doesn't matter how much you appease them or do a deal or whatever. The fundamental structure of the relationship doesn't change for Russia. And I think I wonder whether we're not, and it is this idea that we need to think in the long term about this one, about how it repositions Russia. Russia's position does not change.
No, and also I think it's really important to remember as well that when the conflict began, people were pointing out that Putin's aim was not to get a chunk of Ukraine or even the whole of Ukraine. He wanted Ukraine no longer exist because, as you say, he believes that Russia is in this existential conflict with the West, and he's got to keep that going because that's what gives him legitimacy. That's what allows him to keep a grip on Russia by saying, listen, even if you don't like me, the prospect of being attacked, undermined by the West is worse. So we are in this battle for our very existence, and he has to keep that conflict going, which means that, I'm sorry, but it's just, we're not going to win until Putin goes in some way. And I think the other thing that's interesting, I always think whatever Trump does, you have to look at it through the lens of reality TV. Trump, yes, he was a businessman, even though there are questions about how successful he really was. He's basically very successful as a reality TV star. So reality TV is only, the episodes are an hour or something. So it's a very short time scale. So you've got to do things very quickly, like do a deal with over Ukraine or something. And of course, the other thing that TV is always looking for is the second series, isn't it? The cliffhanger, what will happen next or whatever. So again, in Trump world, then you're looking for a second series. So if this is a deal and then Putin, shock horror, who would have believed it, somehow wriggles out of it or betrays the West, whatever, then you're on for your second series, aren't you? So in TV terms, it's very exciting. I
want to talk about a brilliant article in Politico about Germany in a moment. But first, let's try and bring this all together because, as is being widely broadcast, Germans are going to the polls tomorrow. They're electing a new lower house of parliament. The current coalition government in November collapsed. But Germany is a leading member of NATO, and the way that Germany's political direction heads has an enormous amount of influence on the international stage. Last week, Andrew Mueller and the Foreign Desk team were at the Munich Security Conference, and they heard from Sudha David-Wilp, who's a senior transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the US. A regular voice here on Monocle Radio. And Andrew sat down with her and to talk about how this weekend's elections could actually have an impact on US and German relations. And Andrew began by asking Sudha how she sees the current relationship between the two countries.
Well, there's certainly a big difference compared to the last 4 years. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been quite forthright in calling former President Joe Biden a friend. And the good news is that the playbook in the German-American relationship can still be written. There's an election on the 23rd of February. There will likely be new leadership in the name of Friedrich Merz, and he could perhaps forge a different relationship that President Trump had with former Chancellor Angela Merkel, and of course, Joe Biden's relationship with Olaf Scholz. So, right now, the backdrop does not look so good, but first of all, a new government needs to be formed, and then there can be attempt to be pragmatic on the German-American relationship front.
What did you make of Pistorius's response, though? I mean, he was clearly quite genuinely angry. I don't think he was putting on a show there.
Well, I think he needed to respond. He went right after Vice President Vance, and I don't think he could ignore what was said on stage because he represents also the SPD, and this is a party that was persecuted during the dark years of German history under the Hitler regime. And I think the SPD takes it also very personal when the AfD is seen as a party that is legitimate in the political spectrum. It cannot be ignored. The AfD has support of nearly 20% of the German electorate, but it's also being surveilled by authorities in Germany and has sort of shrugged when it comes to the memory culture of the Holocaust here in Germany. And I think for many German politicians, they take that quite personally.
Out the other side of this election, in which it does seem likely that the AfD will do well, and as you correctly note, it is very unlikely that anybody will countenance forming a government with them. But if you have a new German coalition in charge with a substantial AfD opposition being cheered on by Donald Trump and by Elon Musk, it's not really easy to see relationships between Washington and Berlin improving, is it?
Well, I think, the challenge has already been sort of built in because President Trump, even during his first term, berated Germany about defense spending, couldn't understand why Germany was dependent on natural gas from Russia. All things that are correct in nature. But at the same time, Germany has been seen as an indispensable partner for the United States when it comes to challenges that are important for both countries, such as China, right? China is a issue where Germany and the United States can work together on in terms of making sure that their interests are being met. So I think rather than looking at the things that divide us, it would be far more important if Europe and the United States can work together on those issues like, settling the conflict with Russia because of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, when it comes to containing China, and also now with regard to peace in the Middle East. These are topics that are very important to President Trump, and it would be beneficial to work together with Europe on these issues.
I mean, just finally then, you are of course not wrong to point out that Donald Trump was not wrong when he teed off at Germany about its reliance on Russian energy, about its sluggishness in defense spending, of the absurdity, frankly, of an economy of this size not being willing or able to look after itself. But is there any chance, do you think, that this is the wake-up call that Germany and perhaps Europe more broadly finally decides to listen to?
It's not just Donald Trump. I think many policymakers in the United States have been asking Germany and Europe to do more when it comes to defense spending and taking care of security needs in the immediate neighborhood. But certainly the wake-up call can't be any clearer. And Germany and Europe are ready to do more, but it will take time. And frankly, this sort of action should have taken place many years before, but now firmly the post-1989 era is closed, and Germany and Europe need to come together in terms of being stronger and show a strong Europe is in the interest of the United States.
That was Sudha David-Wilp from the German Marshall Fund of the US talking to Andrew Muller in Munich. Listening to that, I think it's probably a good idea, Simon Brooke, to examine a brilliant article in Politico this week that Sudha there talking about the US-German relationship. There are more, dare I say, more sort of like violently bubbling relationships that need to be assessed in terms of what's happening between Germany and Europe. And there's this astonishing revelation that Friedrich Merz from the CDU, who is most likely to become the next German chancellor, doesn't like Ursula von der Leyen. Not just doesn't like Ursula von der Leyen, but they were rivals.
Absolutely. I think it's worth putting this piece into context. And Sudha David-Wilp was saying there that, that building this European capability, defence capability, will take some time and it should have been done many years before. Yes, I think we all know that. And I think one of the problems that Europe faces at the moment is you could argue that actually, every crisis has an opportunity. So Trump's strategy, such as it is, of removing US support, military support for Europe in the face of Russian aggression, could be seen as an opportunity for Europe to grow up and create its own effective defence. The problem is, as this piece in Politico it sort of explains, there is no strong leader in Europe to do that. If we'd had a strong, united Europe, then they'd be in a much better position to do that. So obviously, Friedrich Merz, as you say, is very likely to become the next German chancellor, even though there'll probably be a month of negotiations until he gets there. You would hope, or Europe would hope anyway, that he would be in lockstep with Ursula von der Leyen, that they would be working very closely together. But this Politico article, as you say, points out that actually there's a lot of history between these two very senior German politicians, and they do not like each other. The reason why they do not like each other is Angela Merkel, who was a great supporter of Ursula von der Leyen, who really helped her launch her political career and become president of the Commission. The problem is that Merz did not like Angela Merkel, didn't believe that she should ever be German chancellor. And so, of course, Merkel hates Merz. And so because of that, sort of fed through now to this antipathy between Ursula von der Leyen and Friedrich Merz. And so, it's fascinating to look at how their different policy positions put them in conflict with each other. And I suppose to some extent their whole approach to politics and the way they work. Ursula von der Leyen, very much the kind of person who likes to have a small group of advisors around her. Friedrich Merz is much more gregarious, more likely to talk to more people, more advisors. So, fascinating. And it does look like things are going to be very difficult when, assuming he becomes German Chancellor.
What I quite like about the Politico article is when you have the tiny examples which demonstrate the bigger problem. And you have this wonderful thing about Friedrich Merz told a podcast of Die Zeit of, I now have a very close relationship with Ursula von der Leyen. We often are in conversation. And then Politico just gives a list of all the times of when they're supposed to have met and something has gone wrong.
Funny that.
That when Merz went to Brussels in September, von der Leyen didn't have time to meet him. Weeks later, they planned Sunday dinner in Berlin. The CDU leader didn't arrive on time and the meeting morphed into breakfast. It's that thing that when you don't prioritise someone, if you don't turn up, it doesn't matter.
It tells you so much, doesn't it?
It's
and
such
actually,
a wonderful
this makes me quite angry, really, because Europe, it needs these two, along with Emmanuel Macron, needs these two leaders to work together, doesn't it? I mean, they've got to form a working relationship. And if you are getting exactly as you say, so beautifully illustrated here in the Politico piece, these sort of little confrontations, these little slights to each other, then it really isn't good. There's part of me that says, look, you two, bury the hatchet and just get on with it, please. We all need it to happen.
It says she's a Euro-federalist, joint borrowing for EU projects is good. Merz is against it.
That is more difficult.
That's
definitely
hard. But von der Leyen is strict on China. Merz recognises the German relationship with China in terms of trade is absolutely essential to the economy.
But they're going to have to work together, certainly in defence and geopolitical terms, and it will be interesting to see how they manage to do that.
Indeed. And there's an excellent picture of a very tall Merz wagging a finger at a tiny Ursula von der Leyen, which I just thought, yeah, you do that at your peril. Let's talk about newspapers and their approach to breakfast this week. Quite strangely, the newspapers have really gone big on bread and marmalade.
Yes, exactly. So the Times reports on this is inside the world's biggest marmalade festival. Yes, there is such a thing. The World Marmalade Awards judging panel in Cumbria, which is in the north of England. Judges actually have to taste 3,000 jars of marmalade. Now, I love marmalade, so I would love this job. I'm just wondering how I can be on the next awards panel or whatever, because there's something... just marmalade is just wonderful. There's something zingy and fresh about it. And, after you've had your healthy stuff at breakfast, you just want something a little bit sweet. And marmalade does the trick. And I think what's so tragic is so often when I travel abroad, whatever, I do look for a preserve, shall we say, on the breakfast table, and there they've got the little, they've got jam, but I'm sorry, jam's for the afternoon, it just doesn't
What?
It. No, you want jam in the afternoon, you want marmalade. Jam tomorrow indeed, but tomorrow afternoon, not tomorrow morning, because marmalade is the morning preserve.
Okay, what's wrong with jam in the morning?
It just doesn't work. It's a bit like saying...
Which jam are we talking about? Are we talking about super sweet jams, or can we have a bit of a tang? Like a raspberry we can do, surely.
No, sorry, it's got to be marmalade in the morning. You can have your raspberry after lunch. From the afternoon onwards, you can have jam, but I'm sorry, you can't. Marmalade, it's the morning
What
thing.
do you have it on?
Toast.
What sort of toast?
And not croissants, because marmalade...
Oh, no, that's a culture clash that will never happen.
No, exactly.
No, I mean, we have the Entente Cordiale, but marmalade on croissant,
it
you're
would
quite
come
right.
crashing to a halt, wouldn't it?
Seriously,
Exactly.
they'd close Eurostar. So for me, very important. This is so boring if you're not interested in marmalade. I do apologise, everyone.
If you're not, go out and buy a pot of good quality marmalade and enjoy.
Now, that's the thing for me. Good quality marmalade is now a massive thing, which is hard to find. And I think this festival is now sort of highlighting the joy of a good marmalade. Finding a good pot of marmalade isn't easy. Anyway, bread is important, though. The Times has an article about people getting cross about bread this morning.
Yes, absolutely. So sourdough, as we know, can be very controversial. And there are real sourdough enthusiasts, I know, aren't there? So the question is, though, are you getting the real sourdough? So according to the Times, supermarkets are capitalising on the success of artisanal breads by selling, shock horror, cheaper additive-filled alternatives for a premium price, campaigners have warned. I love this warning. You can imagine sort of warning on health, on the economy or something.
I can imagine the PR team trying to cook something up.
Warning on sourdough. So, yeah, it's what you don't want is sour faux, according to the Times. So just watch out for that. Perhaps there is a good thing here. Perhaps if we pay a little bit more for our bread, then we would really make it last, wouldn't we? We wouldn't get halfway through the loaf and go, oh, it's gone a bit stale, I'll throw it away. We would really enjoy it and savour it.
And a good loaf actually doesn't last in our house. That's the trouble.
In that case, when you get it, cut it in half and put half in the freezer.
Plastic bag.
Sealed
plastic bag.
Yeah, exactly.
Works a treat.
And then recycle the plastic bag, obviously.
See, if you're listening this morning, you've got not just geopolitics and the wonderful ins and outs of the Friedrich Merz and Ursula von der Leyen.
Food for thought you have.
We're helping. Thank you so much for that, Simon. Right. It's probably come as no shock to you that Georgina Godwin is on her travels still. Her voyage, her tour of the world is unbelievably exciting. And she sent us this little update.
Dear Emma and the Monocle on Saturday crew and listeners, this literary tour continues to be a delight. Since we last spoke, I've been in Colombo, Singapore, and now I'm in Bali. In Colombo, we dined with German and British diplomats and bankers, and also the man they call Sri Lanka's Jane Austen. He's architect and writer Ashok Ferry, author of bestseller Kolpatty People, amongst many other social and romantic comedies set in the country. He and his family live in an exquisite colonial house from the 1800s, which he's lovingly restored. He has a fascinating backstory, which you can hear all about in an archived edition of Meet the Writers. We also met a British tourist who claimed to be the great-great-great-great-nephew of the actual Jane Austen. But our delighted reaction to this was rather tempered by the fact that he said he'd never read a word of her work. In Singapore, we stayed at the Como Metropolitan. Christina Ong, the founder of Como Group, has returned to the company's home country by opening this latest development in the heart of the city. She's brought many signature elements of the brand together in the 19-storey, 156-room pared-back property. There's curated collections from her multi-label fashion company, Club 21, Cote Korean Steakhouse, the Michelin-starred gourmet restaurant, patisserie Cedric Grolet, and the urban flagship wellness retreat, Como Shambhala, where I had an outstanding massage. Our literary event was a private salon hosted in the home of Smita Bajaj of the Jacaranda Literary Agency and attended by her stellar list of local authors, including journalist and critic for the Straits Times, Akshita Nanda. Her award-winning book Nimita's Place is written with dual timelines. The book follows the stories of two women, a couple of generations apart. One who conforms to family expectation in India in 1944, and the other trying to pursue a modern agenda in Singapore in 2014, both questioning their identities and the meaning of home. We took in the view from Marina Towers and ate at the Newton Food Centre, sampling delicious hawker cuisine, and spent some time at Changi Airport, which, as any frequent traveller to the region knows, is well worth early check-in because of the facilities on offer. Arriving in Bali, we headed to Ubud, where an old friend had lent us his house for a couple of days. Villa Kaja is available on Airbnb and is yet another example of the exemplary architecture in this part of the world, with big, airy rooms opening onto an infinity pool, in this instance overlooking the rice paddies. Ubud itself is an artist's town. The man who built the house is also a painter, in common with many in the area, producing exquisitely detailed work in between driving and building jobs. The housekeeper arranged for a masseuse to come and deliver a soothing treatment, including a flower bath. Well, you'll only find the pictures of my feet on Instagram, as it turns out that a bath full of petals isn't quite enough to maintain decorum on social media. We're on the island as guests of the Ubud Writers Festival, who've arranged some off-season workshops and talks for us in a couple of different resorts. I'd forgotten how much I love teaching and hugely enjoyed giving what was billed as a masterclass in broadcasting, though to be honest, I think I learned more from the participants. I also discovered a great new podcast by Michelle Neeling called Oblivious Witness. Well worth a listen if you have the time. Sending love back to you wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, Georgina, and we are over the moon to see that you're having such an amazing time. That's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to Simon Brooke, but also to the producer Desiree Bandley and Mariella Bevan. Our studio engineer was Alan Whedon, and Monocle on Saturdays back next weekend. For now, from me, Emma Nelson, thank you for listening. Have a good weekend.